Hi, British literature. I thought I would come to you from my backyard because the weather is gorgeous and just a change of pace. I hope that this week went well. If you haven't figured it out, you were supposed to take a test on Toolbox this week. Trying to have some grace with you guys, so please email or text me if you have any trouble. I also would really appreciate it if you guys could get your homework turned in on time via Toolbox, via text, via email. You choose. I'm trying to make everything work for you guys. I know that it is a new world even for us in homeschool co-ops because we think, well, we still have school, but because everything around us is changing, I know that that schedule, your every day is going to be a little bit different too. So with that being said, I want to jump into this week's class. I have a couple of authors I need to go over, including last week's authors that you guys wrote down facts about. I just want to touch base and let you guys know a little bit about William Butler Yeats. He was born in 1865 in Dublin, and he lived a pretty long life. He lived until 1939. Just so you guys are aware, he did write some beautiful work and was awarded a Nobel Prize in 1923. So while he won the Nobel Prize, one thing I like to point out is that he actually wrote most of his more renowned work after he got that award. He did have a big family. He was the firstborn of 6 kids. As far as his family is concerned, his father was the co-owner of like a milling and shipping business. So he didn't have that strong educational upbringing that we've heard or read about with other authors. He met a woman in the 1980s. He met a woman in his life that he called Maud, and he eventually fell in love with her, and she actually didn't love him back, but after refusing his proposal a couple times, she gave in, and they were married and had 2 kids together. And just so you guys know, that was in the early in his life. He has some amazing poetry. I hope that you guys enjoyed this week and were able to read. Now, as far as our next author, Virginia Woolf, I hope that you guys enjoyed her as well. I personally don't think she's my favorite. Like, she's not someone that I go to all the time as far as her writing is concerned, but her writing really opened up an avenue for women in writing that hadn't been opened before this. So just to kind of give you a rough summary of her life, she was born in 1882 and she lived until 1941. Was not as long a life as we saw with Yeats. So her father was actually a man of letters, and so she grew up in a very literary and intellectual atmosphere, contrary to Yeats. But she did experience the death of her mother when she was 13, and she was abused by her stepbrothers after her father remarried. She lived through so much in that time period, but later in her life, during the Second World War, she actually suffered from anxiety, and she ended up writing over and over again a suicide note, but ultimately drowned herself. She put stones in her pockets and drowned herself in the River Wease. So kind of a tragic life, but out of that life, she became a member of the Bloomsbury Group, which now we see in Bloomsbury as far as publishing. It was really a group of people that were very artistic. They were considered experimental novelists, and so essentially her work just continued to evolve throughout her life, but she didn't write very much because she died, I think it was at the age of 39. Now, you guys read A Room of One's Own, or a part of it, and just so you know, it really deals with the subject of women and their relationship with society. So let me scroll down a little bit, giving you guys a little bit of regular class time note taking. So as far as her stories, there were so many of them that had an impact on culture, and part of it was because she was considered a feminist, and she wrote some ideas that it's not that they hadn't been thought of before, but it was that they hadn't been written before. She really used symbolism in a lot of her work. Her essay, just so you know, A Room of One's Own, it's partly fictionalized and partly true. And as far as the figure in it, there's an importance that's coming out of tradition in the story, but then also there's this idea of aspirations that come out of tradition. So just so you know, those are some things I want you to remember about Virginia Woolf and A Room of One's Own. The piece is really about women's rights and struggles that were happening during that time period, around 1929. So moving on, you guys, we are going to talk about 2 new authors. You guys are also going to have a quiz this week. I hope that this test was a good practice, because you're going to have a quiz this week on Screwtape Letters. Just so you know, it won't be very many questions, but it'll be through Toolbox. And then you guys are going to, hopefully if you do this in order, after watching the video, you guys are going to take the quiz, and then you're going to read your homework. You were going to read some work from Thomas Stearns Eliot, or T.S. Eliot. And let me just tell you a little bit about him. He was born in 1888. He lived until 1965. You guys have probably heard his name before. He was born in St. Louis, Missouri. Now, he actually, he studied in Paris, and that's why he's considered British literature, is because he actually married a British ballet dancer named Vivian Haywood. He established himself as an important avant-garde poet in his time, and he became the director for the publishers of Faber and Faber in 1925. So he acquired shortly after that a British citizenship, and that's why he's considered one of our authors in British literature. So he actually, while he was a poet, it's really funny how from what he grew up in, which was like a very orderly poetry or idea of poets and poems, he would, obviously this time things were more optimistic. There were morals and values in poetry. In the 19th century, like Victorian age, we're moving into this 20th century where things are going to look more chaotic. I like to tell students that when you read T.S. Eliot, think about the idea of Picasso paintings. Things become a little unstable, whether it's art or whether it's poetry. And things are going to be a little confusing as far as a sense of identity and being able to pinpoint like what each poem is about. Our next author is George Orwell. I love this guy and I love his work. Sorry about the airplane. He was born in 1903 and he lived until 1950. Just so you know, it's a really loud airplane. He was born Eric Blair in India in 1903, and his whole life was kind of about this idea of moving from one place and then being supplanted in another. So being born in India, he had kind of a really free, loosey-goosey education, but then was sent to England where he began a more formal education. And because of that, he really butted heads with a lot of professors and teachers. He proclaimed atheism and socialism, as a young man, and he ended up leaving college to start work. He actually moved back to India, and he worked for the Indian Imperial Police in Burma. So he was influenced by Dickens, and a lot of the social themes and using realistic language, which would for us mean that he wrote people speaking the way they spoke. So if you read a story and in the dialogue someone uses the word y'all, that's not technically grammatically correct. So someone that's a more polished writer or maybe more formal would write you all, but T.S. Eliot was the type of author that would write y'all. He wrote a lot about misery caused by poverty to try and bring attention to poverty, and then also just the deprivation of society and how in cultures that he grew up in, and then being transplanted into England culture, that they were just not aware of the world around them. So you guys are really going to enjoy T.S. Eliot, I think. And with that being said, I think you're really going to love George Orwell too. So you guys this week, don't forget to take your quiz on Screwtape Letters. Don't forget to turn in your homework from last week, right? And you don't have classwork except to take the quiz this week. And then you guys are going to be reading those two authors and answering questions and turning those in. I hope that you guys are having a great week. I know, like I said, this is not an easy time, and I don't assume that it is for any of you. So please keep in contact with me. If there's anything I can help you with or anything that I can do for you to make things a little bit more smooth, please let me know. With that being said, contact me. Just send me a text or an email if you need help, and I'd be happy to do that. All right, I'll talk to you later. Bye.